Sturgeon to pitch this well and to satisfy the surge. I mean, one of the arguments which is made is, well, are the surging new members of the SNP all fundies in the old sense? Is it, I want an NDUF tomorrow? And I think that's political poison as far as the SNP is concerned, that we're going to have to be very, very careful around that, because if it seems like, or is the case, that we're not really respecting what is a decision taken by a very substantial number of people who, made up their own minds based on the evidence as they saw it and their preferences. If we don't seem to be respecting that, then that is very risky. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that there will be an impatient part of the population that doesn't want to hear about this for a substantial period of time. And I, to be honest, think that section of the population has a good point. I mean, we've had this debate for a long period of time, and I think the case for voting SNP in the general election has to be about something else. It can't, for me, really be about independence. It has to be about, as Gillian was saying, fighting Scotland's corner, or ensuring that certain powers are delivered and having a strong way of blocking any attempt or politically to renege on any sort of deal that's been cut. If the case is vote for us for independence, then I'm not sure that's a very cunning strategy just a few months after Scots have pretty resoundingly said no.
It might be a cunning plan, but it won't be a cunning strategy.
I have to say that this is why I've had a bit of an issue with people saying that, I'm not going to submit anything to the Smith Commission because I want independence and that's all I want, and this is just a farce. And okay, fine, I can understand why people are suspicious of it, whatever. But we've had our chance to vote for independence. We didn't get it, so we now have to move on and make as much of a noise as possible about getting the maximum amount of powers that we possibly can. So if that means writing to the Smith Commission or voting SNP or joining the SNP, then you absolutely have to do it. You have to understand, if we had, this poll today, if we had a referendum today, I actually just don't think that we would get a 52% result in it at all. I don't think it would be much different.
More importantly, do we have to start saying we are the 52% now?
Oh,
oh dear, let's not. No,
it's just a joke. But okay, and to move on a little bit, but still on the SNP. So there's the fact that it's all change at the top. Angry Salmond is out, and now we'll all be looking at Angry Sturgeon's tweets. So the top position seems to be more or less sorted out. So the deputy leadership, has anyone got any thoughts on this in particular?
Well, I've not actually made my decision yet. I was quite pleased that Andrew had his blogs from the three candidates earlier on. And there was someone on Twitter, a guy called Nabdy, who's quite funny, who said he'd made his decision in reverse order of their enthusiasm for a Yes Alliance. And I am kind of thinking that way, to be honest, since those polls. But for me, I like all three of them. They've all got certain strengths, but I don't know, in terms of the role that deputy leader performs, in terms of kind of shaping policy and stuff like that, I think one of them maybe has stronger ideas of what they'll actually do, whereas the other two maybe just kind of have ideas of what they'd like to do, but just kind of swaying me at the moment. But
are you going to name names? You're dancing around it rather elegantly there, Doug.
I'm going to push you out of that.
Name names. I'm quite happy to tell you who I vote for. Okay. And I'll tell you why, because it's pretty much the same reason that I think that people should send MPs down to Westminster. I voted for Stuart Hosey, and I was quite happy to vote for any of them because I think they're all excellent from what I've seen and what I know about them. But the reason I voted for Stuart Hosey is the same reason that I think that we need to have a massive representation down in Westminster, because at the point where the Smith Commission and whatever that comes up with and this push for Devo, we need to have, I think we're going to get ignored to a certain extent. But if we have our deputy leader down in Westminster, I think that'll have more of an effect. So the very fact that Stuart Hosey is an MP down there, it's almost like the opposite of why the Labour Party shouldn't have Jim Murphy leading them. It's kind of the opposite way round from that. I think that it would be good to have an MP down in Westminster with the status of being deputy in the SNP. I think that's a good thing. And that was the thing that swayed it for me.
Though some people would argue that that Stuart Hosey has not benefited from all the gossip about the Maximum Eck unleashed now to do whatever he fancies, and all this talk about Will Salmon stand and Gordon, which you can sort of imagine him doing. And actually, people, since he resigned the day after the referendum result, several folk have spontaneously said to me, "Oh, he'll be off, he'll be away." And I think that could be quite good fun. You could definitely see a role for Salmon doing that.
Yeah. But Gordon's my constituency, so on the one hand I'm quite pleased because I really at the moment it's Malcolm Bruce's constituency and he's retiring, and Christine Jarden's going to be standing for Lib Dems, and the very thought of Christine Jarden effectively inheriting this sort of like so-called safe Lib Dem seat and losing it to Alex Salmond would give me enormous personal pleasure.
You see Schadenfreude as an essential part of politics, I suppose. But there's a few interesting things, though, Michael, about your first question and how that ties up to the second in terms of these deputy leader candidates. What strikes me about their three pieces that they had, and I give them space on the blog to write something and didn't edit it and let them say whatever they like, and they clearly don't know really who they're pitching for or where the membership is. So I think the ballot's about 50,000 people, many of whom are new, many of whom have not been in the party for more than a few weeks. And I think Constance, Hosey and Keith Brown, all of them, are sort of feeling their way rather gingerly towards trying to work out what will persuade the huddled masses that have come in the surge. So I think it's going to be really unpredictable which one of them actually wins. With Hosey, you could see, as Gillian was saying there, a sort of case for a distinctive Westminster presence. With Keith Brown, you might apply the American vice presidential logic and say, well, Nicola is a young woman from West Central Scotland. Keith Brown represents Clackmannanshire. He's an older gentleman, not that much older, but a bit older, and therefore has a sort of balancing up on the ticket. Then you have Angela Constance, who is was of ages with Nicola Sturgeon, I think was at university with her, but again represents Almond Valley in the Lothians. So that's a sort of slightly different ticket, and some people might find the idea of two women leading the SNP to be an attractive one. I suspect that those kinds of issues might be more decisive in terms of how people vote than questions of policy, which it's difficult to see quite what any of them might do differently from one another as things stand.
Just on the note of balancing the ticket, and I might cut this out, but I can see that Obama tried to do that with Biden, but I think Bush's guiding principle was to choose the craziest motherfucker he could find as his vice president.
But then it goes back to Margaret Thatcher.
Then, Michael?
That might be a Mr. Dick Cheney. I couldn't believe it when they said he had a heart attack, because I didn't believe he actually had a heart.
So
and why who would that be in the SNP deputy leader candidate?
I'll take the fifth on that one since we're talking American.
You can join Doug in his waltz away from that particular liability. But Margaret Thatcher, if you think about the great double acts of recent political history, you had March and Willie Whitelaw. She said everybody needs a Willie. Who was a kind of backroom boy who smoothed Margaret Thatcher's passage for a period of time through the Conservative Party. You had Blair and Prescott. So shiny modernity, Jim Murphy-esque policy combined with by gum, I'm an ordinary man, mate, etc., that kind of idea. So they had that idea of balance on the ticket.
And Clinton and Gore, you've got the Clinton, you're smooth guy, and Gore, you're serious guy. But obviously not that serious, but there you go.
Yeah. Exactly. So we'll have to just see how it works out. It'll be interesting to see, and it might be an interesting cue about this question about, well, what kind of ideology does the new SNP membership have to some extent? Where do its passions lie, and what are its priorities? I think that's one of the more interesting questions about the surge, which will gradually, I think, become clearer.
But moving over to the other side of the Scottish Parliament, that's a good segue, because we're still on leadership elections. And there's the demise of Joanne Lamont, and There's some questions about exactly who decided it was time for her to go. I've heard. And Andrew, you had written a blog about. You're normally quite guarded in your words, but you basically said not fit for purpose, didn't you? So I don't know. What were your thoughts on Joanne going before we get to the people who might be replacing her?
Yes, well, I was quite emotional. I just felt glad I published that blog when I did, otherwise it would have been too late. No, I mean, she was a lost person. A person I've said on this podcast a number of times before that I have a strange sort of soft spot for her, misplaced perhaps, but nonetheless present. She certainly went out with a bang. I mean, it was remarkable in terms of casting aspersions, washing the dirty linen in public, and it prompted a range of other folk, including Andy Kerr, the erstwhile Health Secretary in Scotland, and the erstwhile First Ministers, to really stick it to their Westminster colleague. And it felt like settling up old scores. Here was a chance. Here was permission to say what they'd always thought. And it really has been, for the Labour Party, a remarkably ugly couple of weeks. And you'd have to have a heart of stone, frankly, not to laugh.
Yeah. I know there was people saying she went out with dignity and stuff like that, whereas I just kind of saw it as quite cowardly to wait until she was leaving before saying all this stuff that a lot of us on the yes side have been saying all along, that they were getting orders from London and stuff like that. And you think, rather than throwing your toys out the pram, why didn't she actually just stay and make these points and try and implement changes? I don't really get the dignity thing that some folk have come out with.
I mean, I'm quite pleased that she said what she did because I was loving it. But at the same time, I'm more like Doug. I thought, oh, for goodness sake, women, you know what I mean? You thought all these things were happening to you, and yet you kept quiet. And we knew, we were watching her in debate. She came across as that she just didn't know what to say. But of course, now we know she was told not to say certain things. Mm-hmm. How many months? I mean, what kind of person do you have to be to put yourself in that position where you're so tied and you say nothing and you do nothing at such a key point in Scotland's history? I have really very little respect for her, actually. And I think that she does herself a great disservice. On the one hand, I thought, well, go on, you tell it like it is, Joanne. But at the same time, I thought, oh, you absolute coward. You could have really made a stand. You could have said, oh, I'm not even talking about this before the referendum. I'm talking even in the weeks leading, the week immediately after the referendum as well. She's waited until almost she's got an excuse to spit the dummy. The fact that chap was taken away, she was obviously reasonably close to into her. I forget his name. You'll need to help me out. She would have had more dignity if she said, right, our submission to the Smith Commission is going to be this, and I am the Labour leader, and it's got to be Devo Max, and it's got to be the vow, and it's got to be all these things that Gordon Brown was bleating on about. Instead, she was the head of putting in this lukewarm proposal. She let all that happen. That should have been the reason she left, not the rest of it.
Well, I was astonished. Astonished. No. Well, I wasn't actually, but I mean, if you think about it, like, the four of us are quite politically active people, obviously, but for most of the Scottish public, she's been and gone in a blaze of indifference. And
you're a blaze of indifference. That's worth bearing in mind as well.
Yeah, I mean, even right up towards the referendum, there were still loads of polls come out. People didn't even know who she was. I mean, she made very, very little. She had a very, very light impact on the political scene in Scotland. I'll say it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's. I think the point's interesting actually that Gillian was making about what would a brave person have done? What would a courageous person? What would Margaret Thatcher have done? If we're gonna, can't imagine.
Well, that's what Ed Miliband asks himself every day.
Exactly. In a different sense, perhaps, Michael, but in a sense of, if she'd stood up and I'd been sort of a bit more vigorous and said, no, I'm taking over, then it would be a different sort of barrel of herring. But instead, it's this rather pitiful story that the bad guy in Westminster wouldn't let me do all the wonderful things that I wanted to do. And then you think, God, wait a minute, Joanne Lamont was crap at her job, that she was useless, that she was useless, that there's a good reason why our Labour colleagues in London and in Holyrood were briefing against her and their leadership team, which is because they were crap. And you can't get past it with this sort of rather self-serving story that London was bad to us. You think